Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents A Witch's Guide to Fairy Folk, How to Work with the Elemental World by Edain McCoy. Narrated by Tegan Ashton Cohan. Publisher's note. This audiobook will refer to additional materials included in the print and e-book editions of the book. Additionally, this audiobook includes many references to exercises. Please have a piece of paper with a pen or pencil, or a note-taking device available. Introduction. Why fairies? It is nightfall. A howling wind has risen off the sea, battering the thatched roof cottage sheltered in the green hills. Hills which now appear as black giants, standing as mute guards over the storm-tossed land. Inside, a peat fire burns in the ancient stone fireplace, and beside the hearth sits a small bowl of milk, as if in waiting for the family cat. On a heavy, weather-worn chair before the hearth, a woman sits, gazing into the fire's light. All around her, almost imperceptible to the casual observer, is a protective ring of blue-white light. Suddenly, the fire leaps joyously as if in answer to a question. The woman smiles, rises, raises her arms in a gesture of dismissal, and the blue-white circle fades into the ground and disappears. She picks up the now empty milk bowl and goes to bed. In another cottage far away, a family, all but the mother, is sleeping soundly in their quilt-covered beds. The night is still and cool. Across a night-darkened meadow, a small light is seen coming steadily toward the cottage. It is the mother, her lantern held high, casting a circle of golden light around her night path. She reaches home, tired from attending the bedside of an ailing friend, whom she believes is now out of danger. Suddenly, a low, blood-chilling wail rends the quiet night. The ghostly keening continues for several minutes, and then moves on. The mother shivers and pulls her shawl more tightly around her thin shoulders as she goes to check on her children. She knows now that her friend will not live after all. By morning she receives the not surprising news that her friend has died. Both of these stories are about fairy folk, the little people who inhabit the astral realm known as Fairyland, a place that is both within and yet outside of our own world. This realm has also been called the astral plane, the inner plane, the ethereal world, heaven and hell, a ghost dwelling, the land of the dead, an alternate universe, and a parallel universe. And its elusive inhabitants have been known by many names, among them angels and demons, elementals and imaginary beings, and ghosts and fairies. Fairies have been believed in and have existed in some form for as long as humans have been here. Seen usually as elemental energies, seasonal helpers to the deities, nature spirits, or as demigods, they have been the subject of much human speculation, fear, and folklore. So pervasive are the legends which abound about them that occasionally their kings and queens have become our pagan gods and goddesses. No anthropologist, ethnologist, or student of comparative religion has been able to find any culture which does not believe in the existence of a race of beings who live in a parallel world somewhere between the realm of deities and that of humankind, a realm which is often referred to as Fairyland. What's more amazing is that modern psychology and philosophy are now willing to give credence, albeit grudgingly, to the existence of this realm. And it may be that the hard sciences will follow suit. The sciences of physics and mathematics have always lagged behind witches and magicians in their acceptance of what these latter two have known all along. But eventually, science's hard-won formulations back up the intuitive ones of metaphysics. Physics has already proven what pagans have always known, that all time exists simultaneously. And these same scientists are said now to be only a few steps away from proving that all space also exists simultaneously. If that is so, then it stands to reason that there is an astral realm, or fairyland, which coexists with our own world, a world into which we only get occasional and tantalizing glimpses, a world which is separated from our own by only a thin veil of consciousness. Some occultists, pagans included, often make the mistake of referring to something as being merely astral, dismissing it as somehow being less than whole, and certainly not real in any sense that the human world understands the word. Never make that mistake. Not only will it make any excursions you take into the astral worlds more dangerous, but such an attitude is sure to offend those residents of the astral plane, such as fairies, whom you want to seek out for aid and fun. The vast majority of our Western pagan traditions have made a sad error in relegating fairy beings to the role of mere elementals, small creatures who control or archetypally represent the four alchemical elements of air, earth, fire, and water. In the form of the physical directions which they represent, they are called upon to witness our circle magic and our rituals as a courtesy, but they are never asked to participate, nor are they ever approached as sentient, individual creatures. This idea of calling on the elements is a carryover from the days when fairies were asked to come to our circles to participate in the magic. It was once believed that to not at least make the offer was to invite fairy ire and retribution, and many legends, both the true and the imagined, abound about families carrying fairy curses through many generations because some hapless ancestor inadvertently wronged one of the little people centuries ago. And while fairies are, in many ways, elemental beings, they are much more than just that. Fairies have personality and individuality, and though they inhabit a different plane of existence than we do, they do live. They are fully sentient beings, with feelings and rights much like our own. Each family or type of fairy is unique, and each individual fairy has a personality unto itself. Some fairies are mischievous or even dangerous. Some are anxious to be helpful, while others may be only thought-form projections of primal human fears, created from long-ago dangers of the mountains or the seas. Fairies are as almost, but not quite, as individual as humans, and they each have their own solidity, talents, mannerisms, personalities, and likes and dislikes. They can be solid, appearing almost human. They can be ephemeral wisps of smoky light. They can be simply outwardly projected forms of wishcraft inhabiting the astral plane, or they can be seen openly during meditation, or for the short times they manifest on the physical plane. They can be mean or kind, courtly or coarse, and they can fully feel their own pain and anger, and joy and happiness. They can, and do, function as nature elementals, but they are not merely unthinking representations of those elements, though they can and do live in nature and act upon it in many ways. Many fairies can, and often will, aid human work, ritual, and magic if approached properly. How to approach them depends entirely on the individual fairy and what we ask of it. We can also learn to use magic, meditation, astral travel, wishcraft, and ritual to both meet existing fairies and to create new, fully functioning fairy beings to aid us. Does it sound complicated? It's not. Fairies are all these things, and they function in all these ways. It is we humans who have failed to take advantage of the possibilities inherent in fairy-human relationships, just as we have so often failed to see and accept what the animal world has had to share with us. In the past century, humans have expected less and less from fairies, even to the point of disbelieving in their existence. And in all but a few magic circles, they have been sadly demoted to meaningless roles. It is little wonder that fairies are now rarely seen in a world which treats them so offhandedly. To see a fairy, one must learn to see with the heart and mind, as well as with the eyes. A witch cheats him or herself by not learning all he or she can about these capricious creatures, who dance beckoningly on the fringes of our world. This guide is meant to reteach witches, pagans, and others who are interested in these nature creatures about the fairies we have long ago forgotten, and to show how to work with these remarkable beings in a mutually beneficial way. It is also a guide to recognizing those malevolent fairies best avoided, and it will show you how to identify and work with all fairy types. The fairy lore of Ireland and Britain is the richest on the planet. These tales have survived largely intact to this present day, and it is these fairy forms which will take up the majority of this guide. The Irish fairy lore survived, as did Irish paganism, because of the country's location at the far western end of what was the known world, known to Europeans, that is, until only 500 years ago. Likewise, the fairy lore of the British lands in general is some of the best known to Westerners, and because of migration patterns and common language groups, it is these fairies which are usually most easily seen by Western pagans. However, fairies are a universal phenomenon, and every land has its fairy beings, most of whom easily correspond to the fairies of Ireland and Britain. Only their given names differ, and only a few cultural clothing changes differentiate their physical appearance. For example, the kobolds of the Germanic lands can be easily recognized in the brownies of Scotland. When dealing with creatures from other planes of existence, humans often express fear or disbelief. Rumors run rampant, and blame is often cast upon these astral beings for all sorts of human failings. No doubt, some fairy beliefs do stem from ignorance and fear, but these views are easily sifted out from the rest of the world's fairy lore, and a thinking pagan can quickly tell what is a fairy and what is an astral thought form created from the depths of ignorance. Pagans must be ever alert to adulterations, deletions, and outright changes to ancient mythology. Fortunately, most of these are easy to spot by their patriarchal morals and their denigration of females. An example of this tampering is seen in a Neo-Celtic belief, which states that newly married couples should go to bed at the same time, because a wife who is up later than her husband can be stolen by fairies. Some version of this piece of folklore may or may not have existed before the coming of the patriarchy, but chances are it was a measure taken by the new religion to control females by fear and to suppress women's religious cults. Fairy encounters have been well documented, especially beginning in the late 19th century, when the sciences of the mind began to take their place beside those of the body. From the time humans could write until this very century, many meetings and confrontations, both the beautiful and the profane, have been recorded. These meetings have taken place both on the astral plane and in the physical world, suggesting that fairies, like humans, have the mental capacity to project themselves briefly into other realms of existence. Even many modern people who think themselves quite educated and rational see fairies, though they are liable to assume they have merely seen an illusion, a trick of the eyes, or have even dreamed up their encounters with the wee folk. This guide is divided into 3 major sections. The first will acquaint you with fairy lore from around the world. The second will offer practical spells and rituals in which both you and fairies can participate. And the final section will tie all the information together in a dictionary of fairy folk of the world. Yes, fairies do still appear to humans. Often, in fact, especially if one learns the best way to seek them out. And no matter how you view fairies, even if you are a skeptic and wish to remain so, or if your views change once you have finished reading this guide, your relationship with them will never be the same again. They are part of our pagan heritage and, therefore, a part of us all. Part 1. all about the little people. A guide to the personality of fairies, fairy lore, how and where to find them, how to protect yourself, and the truth about the dangers. Chapter 1. The Nature of Fairies. How fairies came to be, and how they invaded the human mythos, are questions which have never been satisfactorily answered. Ask around and you are likely to get as many different answers as people you ask. Some people believe fairies to be nature spirits, while others believe them to be spirits of the dead, caught for unknown reasons on the edge of the earth plane, doomed neither to be in it nor out of it. Some have even claimed them to be fallen angels. But all these hypothetical reasons are as shrouded in mystery, as is the answer to the question, how and why did humans come to be? Many theories by leading mythologists and religious leaders on the subject of who and what fairies are have been put forth, dismissed, and often put forth again by the scientific community. These range from insidious and bigoted theories about pygmies migrating from Africa to Europe, to church-generated hysteria about unleashed demonic energies. Fairies have been called angels and devils, fact and fancy, spirits and ghosts, vampires and werewolves, and a host of other appellations which have nothing to do with the fairies known to pagans. These theories and several others are discussed by mythologist Walter Yealing Evans Wentz in his classic work, The Fairy Faith in Celtic Countries. The book was first published in 1911 and still stands today as a solid and scholarly look at fairy beliefs, both pro and con. In the 18th and 19th centuries, many people in Celtic and Germanic lands likened fairies to the dead, possibly stemming from an older belief that they were human souls awaiting reincarnation. Indeed, there are numerous similarities between beliefs about fairy folk and beliefs about the dead. Like the dead, fairy folk are believed to primarily live underground, to occasionally attempt to lure humans into their world, to move about mostly by night. They are attracted to burial sites such as raths, cairns, and caves, and, the most significant similarity, they often appear in spectral form. Folklorist David McRitchie hypothesizes that our belief in fairies stems from memories of an earlier race of cave dwellers, whose existence barely overlapped our own. And these would have been a squat, pre-Neolithic, proto-human race who lived underground and hunted with flint arrowheads. This corresponds to the fairy lore of many peoples, who believe that their fairies have been among the first inhabitants and still dwell in their earth, and would explain the fairy or flint-head arrows often unearthed in Europe. Some mythologists take the stand that human belief in fairy beings is one erroneously taken from variations in the telling of our own ancient myths, and that these fairy tales are just other versions of the same old stories. And certainly this could be true in part. The Arthurian myths, for example, share a great deal in common with fairy lore, including similarities in behavioral patterns, taboos, and living arrangements. A few fairies have backgrounds which must make us suspicious of their mythic origins, in light of the mortal tendency to cast blame for our difficulties elsewhere. Certainly some fairies were created in the human mind to explain away the natural phenomenon of the earth, for which there were once no rational answers. But these fairies are few in number and quite easy to spot in fairy lore. As far away from India and the Middle East as Polynesia and Ireland, the native words for fairy echo the linguistic roots of these early cradles of civilization. Whether fairies migrated to the rest of the world with our prehistoric ancestors, or whether humans found them already there and gave them the familiar labels, is likely to remain a mystery. Modern pagans, on the other hand, have a very different view of fairies from the under-the-microscope one of the sciences. Most pagans tend to take the view that fairies were created by the deities, just as they created humans and other animals. They are a life form which resides in a parallel but unseen world, commonly referred to as the astral or inner plane, though they have proven the ability to transcend the plane of their own existence and to travel briefly into other dimensions. They have elemental associations, but they are not raw energy. They are thinking and feeling creatures, and they can and do work with witches for numerous magical and ritual goals. Fairy interaction with our pagan ancestors was once a common occurrence. Once upon a time, before we humans turned our backs on our intuitive natures, fairies and humans definitely spent much more time interrelating. Pagans once worked with and lived side by side with fairy creatures, and legends abound which tell us that the relationship ran the gamut from the blissful to the most difficult. But as time passed, and our two worlds polarized, humans as a whole demoted fairies in their minds to meaningless energies, and even pagans assigned them roles in which they were of little or no use as magical or ritual partners. Misunderstandings and conflicts between our two races became more pronounced, and fairies became more pranksterish, capricious, and jealous, as humans sought to exploit them and their gifts, just as we have exploited and misused the other gifts of Mother Earth. An Irish legend tells us that the sea god Manon, sensing a hopeless disharmony between fairies and humans, refused to allow the marriage of a fairy queen named Fond and her human lover, Cuchulainn, the Irish warrior chieftain. Manon raised his cloak between them, decreeing that the world of fairies and the world of humans must forever be separated. With that gesture, he erased the memories of each from the other. This legend has echoes in similarly sad tales around the globe. To see fairies today, one must be open to astral or inner plane experiences, a realm not visible in everyday waking consciousness. J.M. Barrie, author of the well-known fairy story Peter Pan, was not far off when he said that to see fairies you have to believe. Today there remain fragments of fairy lore which echo a time when making these shifts in consciousness was as easy as blinking. These stories concern human beings in voluntary or involuntary trance states, frolicking with fairies in those inner plane worlds from which they were reluctant to emerge. Someone in such a trance was thought to be in fairyland, and if they had trouble leaving that magical realm or dreamily pined away for it, they were said to be pixie-led. All these tales may be metaphors which attempt to explain astral travel. Very young children still can and do see fairies with remarkable ease. They have not yet been taught to close down the active psychic centers we are all born with, and they have not been taught the difference between real and unreal, as defined by Western culture. Children often speak of fairy encounters only to be either ridiculed or patronized by adults. Eventually they are taught that to believe in fairy folk is silly at best and a sign of mental derangement at worst. As a child, I was fascinated by the fairy world. I collected picture books of fairies, and I even chose a fairy name for myself. I had a fairy costume and wanted anyone, to make me some wings. I loved spring, a time when I believed fairies, sent by a loving deity, came to earth to bring new life to the land. I truly believed that I could catch a leprechaun and claim his gold, and I was sure that if I could only find the right place, I could disappear into the fairy world, sprout gossamer wings, and become one of them. Of course, my religious leaders and public school teachers, and even my usually open-minded parents, turned my mind away from such beliefs, trusting that they were doing what was best for me. They stood by proudly as I grew up and, as the New Testament teaches, I put away childish things. Theirs was not a well-thought-out campaign. It just happened. A reproachful word here and there, pressure to mimic adults, a subtle transfer of patriarchal values, and soon I, like other well-acculturated young people, saw fairies no more. For many years I thought those creatures I had seen were the product of a child's overactive imagination. It wasn't until many years later when I first found my way back to the old religion, that I realized those fairy beings of my childhood had been quite real indeed. But because of my socialization, it was a long time before I could begin to see again the barest trace of some form of fairy life. Those who would have us forget our fairy neighbors can offer some convincing arguments, but they are nothing we pagans can't counterbalance with a little rational thought. Separating fallacy from fact where fairy folk are concerned is a matter of degree. One must look at the practical side as well as the spiritual. For instance, one of the many ways in which fairies are said to punish humans who displease them was by pinching, biting, or kicking. Occasionally, the human victims threw fits and reacted with horror at the prickings they felt. One theory is that these sensations were caused by ergot poisoning. Ergot is a disease of grain crops which undergo a season of excessive moisture and not enough heat. Persons who consume the infected grain often react as if they have ingested a hallucinogen, and the effects of the poisoning are most keenly felt by children and the elderly, the same persons most often prone to fairy attacks. Some scholars believe that ergot poisoning was partially responsible for the witch-hunting hysteria in Salem, Massachusetts, since in the early 1690s, weather conditions were right for producing ergot. So the question remains, did people through the ages who were claiming to be attacked by fairies really have ergot poisoning? And even if they did, might it be possible that since fairies are nature spirits, that they use that which is in nature to cause their harm? Therefore, is it reasonable to assume that fairies can cause ergot poisoning if they wish? There are no clear-cut answers, only things which pagans must consider and weigh carefully. Similar arguments can be made about changelings, human babies exchanged in their infancy with fairy children. Some would claim that this change was made in cases where children failed to thrive or were consumptive. At one time, anyone who simply wasted away in plain sight of all was thought to have been taken by fairies. However, since we are dealing with an astral or ethereal realm into which one can obviously not go in human form, it is logical to assume that first the heavy human shell would have to waste away before a permanent entry to the fairy world could be made. So, did these children deliberately shed their mortal shells to venture into the fairy realms? Or did they die and go to the patriarchal heaven? What are the answers? Just how much does the fairy world overlap our own, and just how much harm or help can fairies cause? Perhaps no one knows for sure, but those of us who have sought to restore fairies to their former place of prominence in magical life are just now starting to understand how much they can do for us, and just how much they have been blamed for things they did not or cannot do. As pagans, we should also keep in mind the pagan rede, "As ye harm none, do what ye will." This charge implies an assumption of self-responsibility. We cannot blame other beings for our own failings, no matter how tempting it may be. To do so puts us in danger when we consider the one pervasive pagan law, the threefold law, which states that energy sent forth from us will return to us threefold. If we go blaming others for our shortcomings, we will in turn bear the brunt of someone else's misplaced blame. Witches were always thought to be on good terms with fairies, and were frequent visitors to their burrows, the grassy hillocks under which fairies are said to live. Accusing someone of such an alleged visit was considered proof of guilt during the burning times, the years of European and North American witch persecutions and murders. Throughout this period, fairies were considered by mainstream society to be dangerous creatures, the spawn of the devil himself, and only a true witch would be brave enough to consort with them, knowing he or she was protected from harm by Satan. But in truth, witches must be as cautious in their dealings with the little people as anyone else, maybe more so. After all, witches are trained to see into astral realms. Witches can feel and sense these other beings around them, and witches have developed powers which many fairies also have and may jealously guard. And witches know how to banish fairies and how to destroy them and their world.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?